And what I would fundamentally say is you have to experience it. I mean, this is what I tried to say to my father. I said, I can't explain it to you. I can't explain to you the value of literature the way, again, you can explain the value of a positivist discipline. You can use an equation to build a spaceship, but the value of literature is internal. It's experiential.
Walking home from synagogue this past Saturday with my family, we found 2 stickers on 2 subsequent polls, and we peeled them off. They were the first one says "White people stand up for yourselves," and the second one was "Hitler was right" with a big swastika. And to me, it's obvious that what's going on there, putting it around the corner from a synagogue, is like clear intimidation. Like it's not free speech in the sense of like trying to have rational discourse. It's a sense of it's meant to hurt.
The person being judged, the entity being judged in that situation is not the book. It's you. When you read a great book, the book reads you first. I'm not I think Auden said that. The book reads you. It's a test for you. It's not a test for the book. Doesn't mean you have to love everything. No one's going to. And some people aren't ready to read some things when they're in college. But if it doesn't work for you, it's not because there's a problem with the book.
But is it not possible to make a distinction between an appreciation of a book and also an interrogation of its moral worldview? So, for example, we can love The Merchant of Venice, but isn't it a valid question to ask whether or not Shakespeare's portrayal of Shylock is anti-Semitic, for example? I'm here with William Deresiewicz. He is the author of a new book of essays of cultural criticism. The book is titled The End of Solitude, and it's just a wonderful collection of really sharp essays, which we're hopefully going to dig into in the course of this conversation. Bill, thank you so much for talking to me today.
Sure, my pleasure.
So I love these books of essays. There's such a nice smorgasbord of different ideas, and in this case, in the case of this book, you're a writer who really likes to go hard, be aggressive, pull no punches. Maybe we'll start with what to me was one of the most memorable standout essays from my perspective. An essay, or this is actually an address you gave to the plebe class at West Point, I believe, titled
right.
Solitude and Leadership. This has come back from 2009, and I really loved this address. Can you maybe give some context there to what that was and what that was about?
Sure. So the plebes, for those who don't know, and I didn't before I was asked to do this, are the first year cadets at West Point. And this was actually pretty early in their first year. This address and then the essay that it became were kind of flukish. I had published an earlier essay called The End of Solitude. It's the title essay of the collection about the disappearance of solitude from our lives in the face of the internet, and especially in the face of social media. Our growing inability to be alone, not in the sense of being isolated in a room, but being able to be alone with ourselves and our thoughts, being able to be alone with a book and so forth. And I had a friend who was teaching in the English department at West Point. They have English departments at they have an English department at West Point, just like any other college. And she saw this piece and shared it with a couple of colleagues. And the three of them invited me to talk to the plebes about solitude, talk to them about the importance of solitude. And I thought, I spent my whole academic career at Ivy League institutions. I taught at Yale. I knew how to talk to those students. I was one of those students. We had a common vocabulary and common interests. How am I going to connect with West Point students who I took it and I was correct, are in many ways very different from me? They're different values, different perspectives, often different backgrounds. They're not going to just care about solitude if some bespectacled civilian comes to talk to them about it. So I started digging a little bit online, and I realized very quickly, it's not hard to figure this out, that the most sacred word at West Point, I mean, the slogan is honor, duty, and country. But the most sacred word really is leadership. And for good reason. I mean, the truth is that the people at West Point actually mean something by that word. Unlike, I mean, it's become a very common buzzword in higher education in general. Leadership, leadership, leaders, we're going to make you leaders. So I thought, well, what if I tried to talk to them about leadership and its connection to solitude? Well, first of all, I had to ask myself if there was a connection between leadership and solitude. And so I thought about it, and I ended up with the piece that appears in the book, which is basically saying to be a true leader, you have to be able to step away from the consensus. I mean, the cliche, to think for yourself. But it's not just thinking for yourself, which actually, if you really mean thinking for yourself, it's not that easy. But also having the courage to act on the convictions that you arrive at by thinking for yourself. And this requires some ability to draw the line between where others end and you begin. So in order to be a true leader, you need to be able to think. And in order to be able to think, you need to be able to be alone in the sense that I'm talking about, with solitude. So that was the piece. And I mean, it ended up, I mean, it was quite to my surprise and even chagrin, it became this big text in like leadership, you know. It was taught widely across the military, not just at West Point. Business schools were using it, and corporations were asking me for reprints for executive training programs. It was a little strange because I have no actual experience with leadership myself, except being the object of other people's attempt to exert it, the reluctant object of other people's attempt to exert it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Would you say over the course of your career, you've found a real knack, a real expertise for talking to young people, to speaking to their concerns and anxieties? Do you see that as part of something you've accomplished and something you cultivate in your work?
Well, I mean, I was an English teacher. I was an English professor, first a graduate instructor, and then a professor for like 15 years. So it's not something that I was cultivating for the sake of being able to give talks at colleges. I was just teaching at a college.
Well,
But
not every
certainly,
college professor
no, that's true.
has that skill.
Yes. And as you know, because you've read the collection and you've read the essay called Why I Left Academia, that did not stand me in good stead. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the answer to why I liked academia is because I didn't have a choice, and I didn't have a choice because I spent too much time in my teaching. But I mean, I got into the whole thing because I wanted to teach, because I wanted to connect with college students. So yeah, I don't know if it came naturally. It was I think partly it came naturally, and partly it was obviously something that I developed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When I think about this book in the context of other books that I'm reading or other things that I'm thinking about, you know, I try to be mostly for the purposes of this podcast more than anything else, in touch with the kind of books that are coming out.
Mm.
And I've often reached out to various authors, and I see a constant stream of books that are bemoaning the rise of social media, that are bemoaning this sort of similar problem that you're diagnosing in this book. But they all come from a very right-wing perspective, and they come from the perspective that the solution to our social media culture, our TikTok culture, or whatever that might be, is return to these like extreme Christian nationalist values, and everything, you know, that entails. And so it's such a breath of fresh air to hear someone who can come to this diagnosis, which I believe is an accurate diagnosis, or awareness of a problem, but also not do it with that from that angle. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I'm not familiar with the books you're talking about. I don't think that that's the only perspective. I don't think I'm the only exception to that. I mean, Nicholas Carr's The Shallows is already one obvious example. I mean, a lot of people, or Jenny Odell's How to Be Alone, I'm sorry, How to Do Nothing. But I mean, maybe to take your question in a different direction slightly. I mean, this whole idea of the whole idea of returning to anything is stupid, because we're not returning. Okay, time is moving in the forward direction, and yes, values can maybe be resuscitated, but we're not returning. Second of all, you know, this fantasy that the Christian nationalists or the Christian rightists or the whatever they're called, the Christianists, have now, they're going to re-Christianize. I mean, first of all, as a Jew, and I'm guessing from your name that you may be one too.
Very astute.
It's offensive, but even if even if we just leave out the people who aren't even nominally Christian, the idea that, it's ridiculous. It's a fantasy.
Well, yeah,
But
go ahead.
But that wasn't the main point I was getting to. The main point I was getting to is that I do think this is a huge problem for us. Many people think this is a huge problem for us. There was a book books about attention have come out. I forget the guy's name, but he was doing the rounds a few months ago, British guy. The question is, what are we going to do about it? We're not going to deal with this by abolishing modernity. We're not going to deal with this by abolishing the internet. We're not going to deal with this by abolishing social media platforms. They're not going to go away. And in fact, I think it's probably safe to say that barring some kind of civilizational collapse, these will be with us. These will be a major part of the way we relate to each other for the foreseeable future. Books were invented 2,000 years ago. I'm even just talking about the codex, let alone before that there were scrolls. Books were invented 2,000 years ago. We still have them. I don't think social media platforms are going away. So then the question is, what do we do about it? And I don't want to filibuster here, but my answer is not a systemic answer, because as I said, I don't think those are realistic. My answer is, each of us as individuals needs to manage our relationship with these very powerful new phenomena.
Yeah. But there is a culture war where a lot of the blame, let's say, for in some people's minds, falls on, forces of a secularization or modernity. So I hear what you're saying, and I guess it is interesting to think about that distinction between systemic versus personal responsibility kind of approaches, and it's interesting to hear sort of a personal responsibility kind of approach that, I don't know, to me feels very new and feels very necessary and urgent in a way that I haven't heard. So I guess maybe that would be a more clear way to express sort of my reaction to that.
Yeah, it's interesting to me. Maybe that's possible that's how my book is different. That it's not that it's the only non-reactionary one, but it's the only one. And it's not even like I preach this. It's just kind of an effect of what I'm saying. That what I'm really getting at is this is a personal issue. And I think it's really telling to me that more people haven't thought in those terms. It's true. We read any number of essays, very smart essays in the Times or the New Yorker, people bemoaning what social media has done to us. But they talk as if like we're all of us, including the author themselves, is helpless before these phenomena. And it's really telling to me that we don't think in terms of personal solutions. I think we've really I think it's kind of a cop-out that we tend to immediately go only to what can be done systemically, what can be done through legislation. I know this is a bit of a leap, but it seems to me analogous to the way that we sort of deal with our maybe physical issues by saying, well, take this pill, take that pill. It's like you don't always have to use some kind of technological fix, right? We have selves, and we can, self-direct. We can we can exert some control over our impulses. We can do some work on our minds and our personalities through introspection and noticing our responses and not necessarily always acting on our responses. Ironically, this is the tradition where this exists, where this kind of thinking exists. Not just one tradition, but where it exists very strongly is religious traditions. All religions talk about this, they're sort of based around that. Like, recognize that you're sinful and take personal responsibility. And here we're giving you various ways or techniques of dealing, helping you to deal with this, pastoral counsel or repentance or, meditation, whatever it is. But the secular world seems to have lost that idea.
Yeah. Well, let's just to be clear to the audience, you're nowhere in this book are you advocating the religious lifestyle, so I don't want anyone to get the wrong impression. Right? I mean, tell me if you disagree.
In fact, I'm as a couple of the essays make clear, I'm actually a renegade from a religious
Right.
tradition.
And for good, and I
But
think
I'm not anti-religious either. I'm not anti-religious
right.
either. I was for a long time when I was an angry young atheist, but I'm not anti-religious either.
I'd love to come back to that later.
Okay.
For now, I want to just actually read a quote. I sometimes I read quotes that go a little bit too long, and I have to cut it down. But I want to read the quote from this essay, which to me really stood out. Yeah, I just think it's just worth sharing because just sort of put a fine point on this conversation we've been having, and sort of like make concrete what sort of stood out to me. So, you're talking to this plebe class. First of all, you talk about Heart of Darkness by
Yes.
Joseph Conrad,
Yes.
and you draw a beautiful analogy there to sort of the experience of the book describes, and the experience of bureaucracy,
Yeah.
paper mache,
Mephistopheles.
Mephistopheles. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
And to their experience of the lives that the bureaucracies they're going to have to navigate and things like that.
Right.
But this part I felt was very sharp, where you point to a specific example that was in the news at the time in 2009, the hazing scandal at a U.S. Navy base in Bahrain. And you say, what are you going to do if you are confronted with comparable situation in your own unit? Will you have the courage to do what is right? Will you even know what is right? Skipping ahead a bit here. What will you do the first time you have to write a letter to the mother of a fallen soldier? How will you find words of comfort that are more than just empty formulas? Or yet again, how will you find the strength and wisdom to challenge an unwise order, question a wrong-headed policy? These are truly formidable dilemmas, more so than most of us ever face, let alone when we are 23. The time to start preparing for them is now. And the way to do so is by thinking through these issues for yourself: morality, mortality, honor, so that you will be equipped to deal with them when they arise. Waiting until you have to confront them in practice would be like waiting for your first firefight to learn how to shoot your weapon. And skipping a bit to the last sentence here, and how can you know that unless you have taken counsel with yourself in solitude?
Yeah.
And so I thought that was very sharp, and I thought it speaks to the fact that in my mind there's really a hunger for young people to hear this kind of message. And so I think that's a really powerful message there.
I agree. I mean, that message in particular, maybe, I think in general, there's a tremendous hunger among young people for guidance, counsel, wisdom, and I think a tremendous absence of those things in our culture and in the educations they get. And I think that's why I have some of the books and essays that I've written have traveled very widely among college students and people in the immediate post-college years. And I've talked at, many dozens of colleges, been invited to talk there, because they're not getting it from anyone else. And by getting it, I don't mean people telling them how to live their lives. As the passage you just read indicated, that's not what I'm saying. Just people saying to them, like, you need to think about how you want to live your life. Like, that's completely taken for granted in an educational system that's become more and more instrumental, right? We're going to teach you we're going to equip you with tools that will help you pursue your goals, but we're not going to give you any context in which to think about what your goals should be in the first place. I mean, this is what humanities courses are supposed to be about. This is what college advising at its best is supposed to be about, is mentorship. And mentorship or advising, again, it doesn't mean telling students what to do. It means asking them questions, asking them good questions that help them listen to themselves. I mean, that's my whole book, Excellent Sheep, from 8 years ago, which was the one, the bestseller, and the one people probably know if they know any of the ones I've written. That's what that's about. And that's what the response to that book was about.
Yeah. A lot of time has passed since then. A question that a lot of people deal with, you know, I'm a parent. My children are still young, but it's a question that I think about as, you know, being on the horizon. And, you know, is college worth the money in America? When is college, you know, how does a parent or a student balance that tension between the degree that will you know, fulfill what they deem their creative aspiration or their, you know, intellectual enjoyment versus economically most feasible? How do you think about that now?
Well, I have to pick apart some of the categories you just laid out, because when you say is college worth the money, are we talking about the kind of education I was just talking about? I mean, college does a lot of things, and if you just want to be, college is a lot of things, and if you just want to be brutally practical, yeah, college is worth the money. I mean, I think maybe it shouldn't necessarily be, but just in the simple sense, if you just look at lifetime earnings, the investment in a college education is worth it because there are very few good paying jobs that don't require a college degree now. I mean, basically skilled trades.
Right.
And we probably need more people going into skilled trades. And we probably need a lot of the jobs that require college degrees not to require them because it's a kind of credential creep. But just in practical terms, I think that's the first answer is the question. The second answer is how much money are we talking about, right? There's a great range in terms of how much you're going to end up paying for college. And it depends on where you go.
Should you pay up? That's the question. Should you pay more for an Ivy League education?
Not necessarily. For an Ivy League education?
Or, you know, whatever that case may be.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, you can't give a blanket answer to that. You really can't. And you have to remember also that something that I think people who aren't close to this sometimes forget or don't know is that the sticker price tuition of a school may be very different from what you end up paying, right? Schools will give you, you know, financial aid deals. And a lesser school might essentially pay, if you have good SAT scores, they will pay to bring you. They will essentially buy you by giving you a really good financial aid package. Sometimes that's the right choice, sometimes it's not.
But it's a question between instrumentalism versus following your dreams.
But my point is that's
I'm
a different question, right? That's a different question.
Okay.
So the way you frame the question is the question I've been answering, okay? So now that you ask this other question, what I say is it's a false choice. It's really important to understand that this is a false choice that students are always presented with. Either go to college and major in economics and don't think about all this stuff that these literature professors are talking about because they're just leading you down the garden path and it's all bullshit. Or, you know, go in this horrible direction where you end up with tons of debt and you won't be able to get a job. This is simply not how it works. It's a caricature. So first of all, you can take plenty of classes and things that interest you while still majoring in something more practical. Second of all, especially if you go to a good college, a selective college, majoring in the humanities is not a handicap on the job market. Okay, it's a myth. I mean, yes, engineering graduates make more money than humanities graduates when they first come out. There's no question about that. But data shows that within about 10 years, the gap narrows significantly, precisely because humanities, the kinds of skills that the humanities teach you, and not just the humanities, but, you know, social sciences, basically any course of study that involves a lot of reading and writing and a lot of kind of project-based work, those skills become more and more important as you go along in your career. And you leave the entry level and you have more responsibility and you're coordinating teams and you're problem solving and your work gets more creative. So we have to stop thinking in terms of this. I mean, it's really a ridiculous choice. And you can just go down the list of like former English majors from good colleges who are, you know, like CEOs of companies.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a very reassuring message.
But I mean, look, you know, I mean, your kids should do what they want. They shouldn't do what you think they should.
Right.
And it's perfectly valid for somebody to want to major in a STEM field if it's what they care about. I mean, this is one of the things I say in Excellent Sheep. I'm not saying you should go be an artist or a teacher or a nurse. I'm saying, how are you making this choice? Are you being impelled by what they call intrinsic motivation? Are you going towards something that really turns you on, lights your fire, makes your brain work? Or are you doing it because your parents are pressuring you, or your peers are pressuring you, or because you read an article or somebody sent you an article about how you shouldn't major in this or you should major in that? It's that kind of static that you have to clear out of your head.
How did you get from growing up? Did you grow? I don't know if you grew up in New York or not. I sort of assumed
New Jersey.
You did. New Jersey. Okay. Growing up in New Jersey in an Orthodox Jewish family to becoming the major and then what you studied in college and the college professor and then this path that you took as a writer.
I have a long answer.
Okay, how did that
I
happen?
can give you a long answer if you want.
Please give me what we have time.
Well, okay. So I grew up in this Orthodox Jewish community and went to a yeshiva day school in the same town, which means that I lived in a very small world of a couple of hundred families.
Would you say, was it modern Orthodox or
yeah, it was modern Orthodox.
Modern Orthodox, okay.
And for those who don't know, that means not the people in the long black coats and the big furry hats, the ultra Orthodox, who are basically like Jewish Amish in the sense that they secede from society. But modern Orthodox means people who, you know, keep all of the commandments, but also live in the modern world. They tend to wear they do wear modern dress, usually somewhat modest modern dress. But they're doctors and businessmen, and, you know, my father was an engineering professor. But it's a tight-knit community, and it was really kind of a bubble in the sense that the world outside was alien and it felt a little frightening. And also my parents were immigrants. My father was a refugee from the Holocaust with his parents. They got out, you know, with a few days to spare, actually, before the door shut. So this added to the sense of a hostile world and a sense of insularity. And also because they were immigrants and because they were Jews and because they were upper middle class or middle class to upper middle class, the professional expectations were extremely narrow. The choices were doctor, and that's it. That was the only choice. I was supposed to grow up and be a doctor. And I mean, I won't tell every little piece of the story, but you know, I got to college. I also, because my dad taught at Columbia, I never had a choice about where I was going to go because, you know, it's free if your father's a professor. So because I never had to think about where I wanted to go, I never had to think about why I wanted to go. And I had two great biology teachers, one in 7th grade and one in 9th grade. And I loved biology and I was interested in psychology. And I got to Columbia, but I think mainly I was just fearful about all the freedom that the course catalog represented, in the sense, like, there were all these majors to choose from and it was all bewildering. And I think because of the way I grew up, instead of responding by, like, you know, tasting every item on the smorgasbord, my eyes fell on a joint biopsychology major before classes even started freshman year. I saw it in the course catalog. That's what I'm going to study. I'm so passionate about advising students and trying to mentor students and writing about this stuff because I fucked up so badly, you know? And it's Columbia, so there are all these core requirements. So between the core requirements and this big major, I had basically knocked out or locked up like 3/4 of my college courses before college even started. And that would have been great if I had really continued to be that interested in biology and biopsychology, which we would now probably call cognitive science. But I mean, like a lot of people's experience in college, especially I think in STEM fields, my courses were just one big lecture after another. And there was just sort of no spark. And we were just kind of I think most of us were pre-meds. At a certain point, I decided I didn't want to be a doctor, but it was like we were all just being sent through this system. And by the time I was halfway done through college, I realized, I always love reading. In fact, I'm sitting there in calculus with my boring calculus professor, literally holding a novel under the desk or behind my notebook, because I'm so much more interested in that. I should have been an English major. And it was too late. And I spent the last 2 years of college with my nose pressed up against the glass, wishing I had been, I took a couple of lit classes, some I was closed out of because I wasn't a major. And I left college, first of all, feeling like I'd missed my chance. There was a deep sense of loss, like I had wasted my time. And also, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, because I decided not to be a doctor or a scientist. I just wasn't into it. It was the 80s, so I applied to law schools, but pulled back at the last minute because I realized, like, as I was confronted with the decision, am I going to accept the acceptances? Like, I'm like, wait a second, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be a lawyer. And it was only 3 years, the third year after college, where I was finally like hit by a lightning bolt. And I realized, like, I'm not going to be happy unless I study English. And I've got to find some way to do this. And I'm not going to let myself be deprived of this if I can possibly help it. So I applied to PhD programs in English. And as a biology psychology major, I was rejected from almost all of them. But I managed to get into a couple, and here we are.
Wow. It's a great
Fast
story.
forward. Yeah.
That's funny. A lot of that resonates. I had a sort of the opposite, similar but opposite kind of story in some ways. Opposite might not be the right word, but similar in a lot of ways, parallel. I was like dead set on STEM going in, because in high school I was a big STEM guy, and yeah, I was doing physics, and towards, like, I would say the second half of my 4 years of physics, I really got like sick of physics. Like, I really felt like this is very, very dry and rote and like really not stimulating. And was really attracted to my literature courses,
This
which
is
I
in high
was
school or
taking.
college?
This is college.
Yeah.
I was torn, and what I decided to do was to power through it. So I took the opposite. I said, I'm gonna stick with STEM, and I'll try my best to maintain a love of literature and a reading life, and on the side, which is with this channel, sort of scratches that itch, to some extent.
That's good. That's good.
But again, that tension is there, and that feeling of anxiety, or that feeling of potential missed opportunity, and sort of that kind of a decision-making crisis that college brings about, is very real and very relatable for sure.
Yeah. And like I said, this is really what's powered my mission to try to help other people from making some of these mistakes. I mean, you're going to make mistakes. That's inevitable, but they don't have to be quite as bad as the one that I made.
Yeah.
With I had no guidance. I had no, my advisors were just like, you take your schedule in, they check to make sure that you're fulfilling your requirements, they sign the schedule, that's it. No professors who were at all interested in providing any kind of mentorship. Yeah.
I'm gonna take a short detour a little bit. We'll come back.
Sure.
I have other questions that are more meaty, but I want to just read another excerpt that highlights a great example of your voice to me. When I read this, I was like a big smile came on my face, and I just want to share that with the audience, and a sense of what great writing is, what great critical essay writing is.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear this one.
I love it. There's a few places I highlighted a bunch, like 3 or 4, but I'll only read one, because otherwise we'll be reading punchy excerpts for too long. But we'll just do one. But this is in the context of Harold Bloom. So this was written when Harold Bloom was still alive, and now he's passed. And so Harold Bloom is someone who had like an impact on my reading life, and who hasn't, like, been interested in books and read Harold Bloom. And Yeah, actually, I've criticized some of what he wrote in his book, The Western Canon, at one point on this channel. I felt he was a little bit too, to my taste, a little bit too reverent of a certain kind of reading. But you have a beautiful essay about Harold Bloom where you talk about his experience coming to America. I think I wasn't an immigrant. I think he was an immigrant, or no, he's born here.
Yeah,
I don't
he
remember.
grew up
Okay.
in the Bronx. His parents
Sorry, yeah,
spoke Yiddish at home. His parents were immigrants.
right. But growing up and sort of in between two worlds, the Jewish and the secular, and finding his way at a time when Jews were looked upon as other in
Especially
academia,
in English departments. They were
especially in English
very
departments.
anti-Semitic places.
And you talk about that. You talk about his brilliant mind and
Yeah.
his output and his production. And you also have some. It's beautifully written. It's great. It's an amazing story of his life and what he's done. But you get to some criticisms of Harold Bloom, and maybe instead of reading it, if you remember, if you want to sort of share with it, you draw an analogy to the movie Being John Malkovich. I don't know if you remember this.
I remember, yeah.
Which is
you can read it if you want.
Sure, but to set the stage, the movie is I saw the movie in high school. I loved it in high school. I haven't seen it since then. But there's like a portal where you can go into like the mind of John Malkovich and inhabit his mind. And at one point towards the climax of the movie, John Malkovich goes through his own portal. So he's sort of John Malkovich walking through the portal to inhabit the mind of John Malkovich, and he wakes up in this space where every person looks like him, except is dressed differently, adorned differently, has different hairstyles, and they're all talking in a restaurant. And in their conversation is just the word Malkovich, 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 Malkovich. So you write, Bloom describes the literary world as a labyrinth of interconnected texts, but at the center of that labyrinth is a figure with the head of Harold Bloom. Reading him reminds me of the scene in Being John Malkovich, where the titular character enters the portal that leads to his own brain and finds himself in a world where everybody looks like him, and all they say is Malkovich, Malkovich, Malkovich. In the world of Bloom, every author looks like Bloom, and all they say is Bloom, Bloom, Bloom. I thought that was just hilarious. That put a huge smile on my face. And it's an example of, again, I have other examples like that of just really like a great punchy writing.
Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, so that was our detour. Let me consult my notes here for where we're gonna go. Okay, good. So let's talk about. So there's a quote here. Let me pull up the quote in my ebook text. Let me find the quote. Here we go. Great. So this is interesting. Now we get to something, some really interesting stuff from my perspective, which is the proper way to read literature, let's say, or the way in which we should or shouldn't engage with books. And you have another obviously wonderful essay here. It's titled "Hunting the White Whale." It's about Lawrence Buell's book, "The Dream of the Great American Novel." So
two. It's called "Hunting the Whale," and I was just asked to review two big books about novels. Like one was about like all English novels, called "The Novel, a Biography" by a wonderful English critic named Michael Schmidt. And the other was this by, a venerable Harvard professor, Lawrence Buell, called "The Dream of the Great American Novel." So I used it. I mean, I talked about the two books, which are very different, and I used it for maybe some wider reflections, including on the state of academic criticism.
right,
Because Michael Schmidt is not an academic. I mean, he might teach, but he's not fundamentally an academic. He's a poet, I think, and an editor and a publisher. And Lawrence Buell is, very much an academic.
Right. So okay. So I look, I might have to cut some of my quote reading, and I apologize if I'm reading too many quotes.
No, please. I love hearing the sound of my own
yeah.
voice, especially
here's
from someone else.
Here's what you have to say about Lawrence Buell's book, The Dream of the Great American Novel. So this is obviously the end of a much longer review of the book, and dealing with, in a very nuanced way, of course, the different things that the book doesn't do. But you say as follows, that a certain frame of mind controls the readings. Novels aren't stories for Buell, works of invention with their own disparate purposes and idiosyncratic ends. They're interventions into this or that political debate, usually, of course, concerning gender, race, or class, as if everyone in history had the same priorities as the English professors of 2014. Every book is scored against today's approved enlightened norms. Gone with the Wind loses points for containing scarlet and embodying an atavistic conception of human rights, but wins a few back for being even more transnationally attuned than Absalom, exhibiting maverick tendencies in some respects as pronounced as Faulkner's, and engaging in an act of feminist exorcism that Absalom can't imagine. Go team. That's what you say after the quote is over. And then skipping a bit, you have this amazing line. I feel as if we're back in Salem. Maybe he should just have thrown the book into the water to see if it would float. Can you speak to that? How we should and shouldn't read books?
Right. Yeah, I guess that's what that piece ended up being about. And the book that made me think we're back in Salem was when he's talking about Uncle Tom's Cabin, because it was very progressive in its own day, but it's kind of embarrassing now. And if you're the kind of reader who scores every book against today's approved enlightened norms, then you're going to have trouble with a book like that. Actually, you're going to have trouble with every book, because this is the thing. I'm not going to say most readers, I think not most readers, but most people who get to read in public, most people who have public voices as critics, and I'm including English professors and the way they teach their undergraduates, and high school teachers, and certainly public critics and people who are on book Twitter. That's how they read now. They score every book against today's approved enlightened norms, as if, and I think I say this in that piece too, as if there were kind of moral teleology, like the whole moral development of humankind has been leading to the glorious rightness of the contemporary liberal elite. I find this idea to be repulsive and repugnant and antithetical to what I understand reading to be for. I don't know who originated this quote. I know Fran Lebowitz has said it. I don't know if she came up with it, that a book should be a door, not a mirror, right? The way I put it is that the purpose of reading literature is to expand our humanity, not to entrench our identity. To make me see how similar I am to others, or how connected I am. I mean, I wrote a whole book called The Jane Austen Education about learning to cross-identify with Jane Austen's heroines. And the idea that, now we all read in our silos, women only read books by women, and Black people are only supposed to read books by Black people, or young Black school children are. It just sickens me. And I don't think any real writer would ever sign on to this. Any of the writers that they're putting in their different canons, none of them thought this way. None of the good ones, anyway. They were making a universal appeal that was rooted in their own experience, and maybe the experience of their communities, whether it was Philip Roth or Toni Morrison or Salman Rushdie or whoever. So this politicized reading that is just interested in whether a book has the correct politics or not, as if that's the only thing that mattered, as if it were even relevant, and as if one's own politics were, of course, unimpeachable. They were another thing that I think reading should do, and that it's absolutely done for me in many ways and continues to do, is to create a sense of humility. Partly by making me see myself in some of the sinners, in some of the villains, recognizing that my nature, like everybody else's, is composed of both good and evil. Partly that humility comes from, one of the effects of this politicized reading is to dismiss the entire past. Other than maybe a few things you can pick out that are acceptable, the general idea is that it can all just be thrown in the garbage, and that we only, figured out the correct way to live 20 minutes ago. For me, diving into the incredible imaginative splendors of the past in any art form and from whatever part of the world induces a sense of gratitude and also humility, and I think it kind of helps shrink my ego tumor down to a manageable size. These contemporary politicized readings are also incredibly grandiose. You are setting yourself up as the judge of Shakespeare. When you read a book that many people have thought has been great for many centuries, and you think it's I don't think it's so great. The person being judged, the entity being judged in that situation is not the book. It's you. When you read a great book, the book reads you first. I'm not the, I think Auden said that. The book reads you. It's a test for you. It's not a test for the book. Doesn't mean you have to love everything. No one's going to. And some people aren't ready to read some things when they're in college. But if it doesn't work for you, it's not because there's a problem with the book.
But is it not possible to make a distinction between an appreciation of a book and also an interrogation of its moral worldview? So, for example, we can love The Merchant of Venice, but isn't it a valid question to ask whether or not Shakespeare's portrayal of Shylock is anti-Semitic, for example?
Honestly, I think it's a boring question. I don't really care whether Shakespeare is anti-Semitic or not. What does it do for me? I mean, am I, you know, or to read the Iliad and say, oh my God, they're trading women like, you know, they're objects. What sexists? Really? They were sexist in Bronze Age, in the Bronze Age Near East, in the Bronze Age Levant. What a revelation. It's like, I haven't learned anything. All I've done, I've gone into this magnificent book, and I've come out knowing exactly as much as I did when I started. People used to be more sexist than they are now. Sexism is bad. Why should I care? You tell me, why should I care whether whether The Merchant of Venice is anti-Semitic or not?
That's a good question. You know, and I don't necessarily have an answer for you, but I'll say this. I do appreciate this as a corrective. You know, when I've dug into what is sort of the academic writing that's going on in like the halls of you know, the graduate school programs, you know, like people who are, you know, writing for a graduate school audience, there is a sense of like really missing the forest for the trees, you know, like not just questions of you know, anti-Semitism or racism, but questions of like, you know, what did so and so author think about some random technological innovation, and how does that something like really minute in a book, you know, you deal with like such minutia, you're really like God, like this is why you're approaching the book, you know, like, you know, sort of give me a, you know, very, very bizarre. And I explain that, I understand that as like, well, you have to produce PhD students who are writing dissertations, and they have to find something to write about, you know, and there's a limit to like,
exactly, you know, right,
how much you can say about, you know, the theme of the whale and Moby Dick or something, you know what I'm saying?
That's like, exactly right. Sorry, were you going to say more?
No, I it's a, you know, but I'm curious to hear what you think of that before I continue.
Well, no, I mean, look, you know, that's another one of the pathologies of academic criticism, is that you have to, you know, because the idea is knowledge production, so you have to find something original to say. And as a very wise and brilliant professor, I think he's a philosophy professor, once said to me that the problem in literature is that there's no new data.
Right.
In other words, it's all the same old texts. So as the interpretations pile up, you have to find smaller and smaller little corners. Or, and this is really what's happened, is that what you end up with is a kind of procession or succession of theoretical paradigms. So all of a sudden, some, I don't know, usually French philosopher comes up with some new way of reading. So deconstruction, first it's structuralism, then it's deconstruction, then there are ways of reading through Foucault, you know, hierarchies of power and production of subjects and so forth, and there's feminism, and each time a new paradigm comes in and becomes fashionable, all of those old texts need to be reinterpreted in light of that. I mean, before structuralism, it was Freudianism and Marxism. So that's really what happened. You just end up throwing out everything that was done before, because all of a sudden the theoretical paradigm is obsolete.
But
yeah,
it could be supplementary, right? It could be a sort of a symphony of different perspectives. No,
it could be. I think it's often not treated that way.
Okay.
I mean, just for example, there was a striking moment when I was in graduate school, my first semester in graduate school. I don't even think the professor understood the implication of what he was saying, but it hit me immediately. It was a Shakespeare course, and he recommended a book called Angel with Horns by a critic called A.P. Rossiter from early 20th century. He said, it's a great book. It's one of the few books that we still read that's more than 20 years old. In other words, one of the few critical studies that are still current in the world of Shakespeare studies that are more than 20 years old. What's the implication of that? The implication is that anything being written now is almost certain to be obsolescent within 20 years.
Not what you write.
I don't write academic criticism.
Right. That's true. That's true.
This is one of the reasons why I had to leave academia, because I thought the enterprise was kind of pointless.
Mhm. Yeah.
I mean, listen, there's some great academic critics. And Harold Bloom, before he lost his mind, or whatever it was he lost, Harold Bloom was one of them. And Stephen Greenblatt today is one of them. And there are a few others, but they're not a lot.
Right. No, I understand. And again, I do appreciate this corrective. And we totally agree on the way in which the beauty of a work can really be unraveled when you really get lost in any kind of either political ideology or certain academic minutia. But I do think that, like, when I approach books, I do definitely approach with a Jewish ear, with an eye towards themes related to Judaism. For example, in I think this is a very little known fact, because it certainly went over my head the first time I read the book, but in the Brothers Karamazov, there's a scene where I think it's Lizaveta, she's like sharing a blood libel with Alyosha, if I remember correctly, if that's the scene. But so something like that, like these kind of things, like being sensitive to them in a way, because that's my ear, that's my modern Jewish ear, where a non-Jewish person might not have that kind of attenuation. And so, for similar reasons, because I'm situated in this modern context, I'm very attuned to the themes of homosexuality in Moby Dick, for example, in a way that someone 20 years ago, 30 years ago would probably be much less attuned, I assume, things like that. And so I do imagine this relativity when it comes to reading, because we do bring ourselves, we do bring our culture to bear. So that to me is sort of how I would understand that.
So yes, so let me say a couple of things. First, and I was getting to this, but I thought it was too much to say. Uh, I think the fundamental problem in literary studies, when you approach it as you have to say something original, is that it's a scientific model of knowledge production, which is the only sort of authoritative or valid model in the academy, right? You produce, I mean, because that's what science does, right? You produce empirical knowledge about the world, it's verifiable, and that accumulates and blah, blah, blah. Good. This is not really how literary study ought to work. I mean, there is some positive knowledge, positive in the technical philosophical sense, in the sense of positivism. There is some positive knowledge, like textual work, what's the best text that we can get for the Canterbury Tales, that kind of thing, or biographical work, historical work. But the core element of the enterprise is interpretive. It's interpretive. And interpretations are, they're never definitive, they're never final, they're never positive in that sense. And absolutely, you're right, that they're always relative to the person making the interpretation and the time in which they are making them. That does not make them invalid. What makes them invalid is when you project onto a text. So if you wrote an article that said the blood libel is the essential, that blood libel moment is the essential key to understanding the Brothers Karamazov, I would say that's probably bullshit. But things, I don't think anyone's ever done that. I doubt it. But things like that happen all the time with moments of, sort of feminism, or, there's this, what's become I think maybe certainly was the dominant reading of Jane Austen's Mansfield Park. There's one moment where there's this one exchange that's supposedly about slavery. And an entire, sort of castle was built in the air that sort of centers this as the essential moment in Mansfield Park. This is projecting. This is the reader as Narcissus. This is presentism. This is what you quoted from what I said about Buell, checking it, seeing everything through our own concerns. Or let me just give one more example. Is there homosexuality in Moby Dick? Well, it's not clear. I mean, there's something called homosociality that people talk about, especially with respect to Shakespeare, where the codes of friendship between men were different in different ages. maybe it's homosexual in Moby Dick. I'm not sure, but I have a much clearer example. The Iliad there's no homosexuality in the Iliad. The emotional center of the Iliad is Achilles' relationship with his friend Patroclus, right? And Patroclus dies, and Achilles, it's the tragedy of his life. This is often now read as a homosexual relationship. It's very clearly not a homosexual relationship. They share a room, and they each have a bed, and in each of their beds is their concubine. This is the kind of intense relationship that men at war develop with each other. And if any one of those critics had ever actually gone to war, Sebastian Junger talks about this, maybe not in the context of homosexuality per se, but he talks about the intense relationship that comrades in arms have with each other. So this is what I'm saying, right? Don't project. Don't overinterpret. Listen to what the work is trying to teach you. To read a book truly, someone said, is to consent, is to cooperate in its effort to teach you something. To read a book truly is to cooperate in its effort to teach you something. But you're going to read as a Jew. You're going to read as somebody in the 21st century. Of course you are. You're going to read differently than someone else. And that's the value of literature, as opposed to a mathematical equation where there's one right answer, and you're not supposed to read differently from someone else.
Yeah, I agree. I do agree. Can you give an example? This might be too hard a question to put you on the spot, and if it is, that's fine. It's a little bit of a question,
Yeah, I'll try.
But if I to put, literature teaches us. Literature changes us. It transforms us. But what? Let's say I'm a skeptic. If I inhabit the mind of somebody, let's say I read
My
the
father
book.
was like that.
What'd you say?
My father couldn't
Yeah.
understand what value literature had since it wasn't true.
Right. Many people in my life, I think most people, honestly, most people are skeptics.
That's probably true.
They say I read Moby Dick, for example. Moby Dick's one of my favorite books. I keep coming back to that. But we could pick a different book. We could pick Blood Meridian. We could pick whatever, any list of popular, famous books. All the books that come up in the Great American Novel essay, for example. I read the book. What was I supposed to learn from it? How do you answer a question like that?
I would not try to answer a question like that. I mean, if somebody wants to, take a class with me if I were teaching a class, or read the book together, not that I have time to read a book with someone, but if we could do a thought experiment and we could do that, then we can talk together about what a book is about. I would never stand on one leg and presume. First of all, I would never engage with someone who demands that I convince them of the value of literature or of any work in particular. It's like, I'm like Shammai. It's like, I don't have time for you, okay? I'm not gonna allow you to set yourself up as the judge of the value of literature. And what I would fundamentally say is, you have to experience it. I mean, this is what I tried to say to my father. I said, I can't explain it to you. I can't explain to you the value of literature the way, again, you can explain the value of a positivist discipline. You can use an equation to build a spaceship. But the value of literature is internal. It's experiential. You can't use a poem to build a spaceship. The experience of reading a poem or a novel or whatever can be transformative or just enlightening. But I can't explain that to you, and I can't convince you of it. You have to experience it for yourself. And if you aren't interested enough to take the time, or if you take the time and it leaves you cold, then there's nothing I can say to that. I don't think that everybody is receptive to literature, especially people who are resistant to literature. But the last thing I might say to someone is this. It doesn't have to be a novel. Has there ever been a song that's moved you, or that's made you see the world a different way, or that's altered the course of your life even a little bit? Has there ever been a movie or a television show that's done that to you? This is the experience of art. And I think that while most people are not interested in reading literary novels, literary fiction, almost everybody has some engagement with art, and art as more than just entertainment too. Almost everybody has some set of artworks of whatever kind that have been deeply meaningful to them. Why? Why should a song be deeply meaningful? Because there's this thing called art that does this thing that's hard to describe and is completely experiential and personal. And the song that was meaningful to you, probably I would hate it. And that's part of what's mysterious about it, is that it's different for everybody.
It's a beautiful answer. Thank you for that answer. Last, well, who knows? We're running a long time. I'm mindful of our time. So we're, so we're getting towards the end. But a question that it came up, one of your, I'd say, most fiery essays, if that's a fair descriptor, is from 2017, I believe it was, political correctness. On political
correctness, yes.
And we've seen it in this conversation. You really
yes.
get very worked up. I'm not sorry, I don't mean that word, but get very excited.
No,
get very,
that's fine. Worked up, sure.
On these issues. And they're hot button, they're divisive and exciting issues, to talk about and to, so in that essay, I got the sense of kind of a free speech absolutism. Would you identify yourself as being like a free speech absolutist, at least like in the context of college campuses? How do you think about free speech on college campuses?
Yeah, I think I would. I think any free speech absolutist recognizes that there are forms of speech that are not protected under First Amendment jurisprudence. You can't libel someone or defraud someone with speech or make incitements to imminent violence. But I've thought about this a lot. I mean, what we were still calling political correctness when I wrote that essay in 2017, we're now calling wokeness. It's the same thing. It's just a different name. It's this progressive ideological orthodoxy. The way I've been putting it to myself, this is not about campus in particular. We can talk about campus in particular. Do I think Nazis should be allowed to speak and rally? I would say that as a Jew, I wouldn't want to live in any country where Nazis were not allowed to speak and rally and march in the exact same way as every other citizen is allowed.
But that's modern Germany. In modern Germany, right? So
I stand by what I say.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is, first of all, because my understanding of free speech is that everybody has the same free speech. Like it says in the Declaration, I don't believe the part about endowed by their creator, but we all have fundamental rights, and among them is liberty. We all have fundamental rights. We don't abrogate those rights because we believe something that everybody else hates. So the Nazi has the same rights that I do. That's the first thing. The second thing is that as a Jew, I fear for any society that starts limiting other people's rights for any reason. Okay? And I don't think it's hard to draw a line between speech and violence. What happened, in my view, what happened in Germany, first of all, Germany was a very new and immature democracy. What happened in Germany was that violence was allowed to get out of hand, right? And wasn't punished properly, and it had to do with the fact that the political system was weak. And the democracy was like 5 years old or something. And it's the same thing with what happened at the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. To me, the problem was that the Nazis were allowed to march. The problem was that the police fucked up and they didn't handle it properly, and they didn't keep the groups separate, and they didn't come out in sufficient force, and they didn't take the threat seriously enough. So that's my answer to you.
Mm-hmm. So in the context of a college campus, the many students would say, so, I mean, this might be very silly or nearsighted, but many students might say to you, yes, we support the right of that professor or that in the most extreme case we can imagine, the Nazi to come speak, but we want to do that in the context of our disrupting his presentation.
Well, then they're not supporting his free speech rights, are they? It's called the heckler's veto. So there's the Nazi comes to speak, and I don't think anyone's actually invited a Nazi, but the right winger comes to speak, and you pick it outside. You protest. You hold a a counter teach-in. Good. Speech being answered by speech. Then there's the other thing. You don't let people in the room. You fill up all the seats and then walk out so no one's left. Or you stand up and heckle. I mean, how could anybody think that they're in favor of free speech when they're trying to stop someone else from speaking? They're only in favor of their own speech. But everyone's in favor of their own speech, as I say in that essay, including Vladimir Putin, right? If you're only in favor of your own speech, you are not in favor of free speech.
Okay. And that's fine. But I think of these questions a lot in the context of this podcast, for example. We're obviously not talking about Nazis in this case, but we're talking just in general, and this is about, I see myself as trying to explore ideas in the books that I read and the people that I talk to. How would you think about me personally, having conversations with authors that, have, very, what I think are very bad politics and not giving sufficient pushback, because currently I choose not to engage with a lot of those people. You have politics you want, Christian nationalism, you're a big fan of Trump. I'm not gonna invite you on and talk. But do you feel like that's also a non-ideal stance, or should it be sort of just this, open?
No, I wouldn't say that. I would say that, this is the whole point of free speech, right? I would say you have a right to have on whoever you want. If you don't want to have on lots of, I understand that. I wouldn't want to have them on either. If you want to have on people that I do object to, who am I to tell you not to?
We're assuming we're in agreement. We assume we agree on what's objectionable or not for the context of this thought experiment. Let's assume that we're on the same page, right?
Well, whatever, whether we are or not, it doesn't matter. If you have every right to platform people that I find objectionable. A publisher has every right to publish books by people that a lot of right-thinking liberals and leftists on their staff, like Mike Pence, because I think he had a book canceled by a mainstream publisher and then it was published by someone else. Or maybe he wasn't canceled, but I think Josh Hawley had one that was canceled. But a publisher has that right. And I have the right not to listen to your podcast, not to buy the book, to boycott every book you publish. I have a right not to hear that speaker. That's not what's happening on campus. What's happening on campus is people are saying, we cannot allow this speaker to speak at all to anyone because their words are violence. And once you equate words with violence, you can permit yourself any kind of restriction you want. In some ways, the distinction between words and violence is fundamental to free speech, to the idea of free speech. And historically, I don't want to go on too long, this whole idea of liberal democracy has its philosophical roots in the aftermath of the wars of the Reformation, right? I mean, Protestants and Catholics, and then different kinds of Protestants in England, went around killing each other en masse for a couple of centuries. And it was out of that like the philosophy of John Locke and the political philosophy of the Enlightenment that leads towards the documents of the American founding emerges. Like, we're going to have to figure out a way for people who violently disagree, who hate each other, who believe each other are in mortal sin, evil, to coexist in a society without that kind of violence or any kind of violence. That's the whole idea. So we set up structures where we can take conflict from the battlefield to the debating arena or the House of Representatives, the parliament. That's the idea.
Yeah. So yeah, I hear that. To pick just the most extreme case, and the difference between America and Germany are very different on this one issue of Nazism. Other than that, they're very similar. But on this one issue, so this is a true story, and it was so shocking when it happened this past weekend that I thought, oh my God, when this happened, right after, I thought I'm gonna tell this to Bill on our conversation. He's not going to believe this is even real because it's like seems so serendipitous. But it's actually a very sad, sort of troubling event, which I think a lot of Jewish people have experienced. It's not uncommon. Walking home from synagogue this past Saturday with my family, we found 2 stickers on 2 subsequent poles, and we peeled them off. They were the first one says "White people stand up for yourselves," and the second one was "Hitler was right" with a big swastika. And that stung. That was scary to see that. And to me, it's obvious that what's going on there, putting it around the corner from a synagogue, is like clear intimidation. Like it's not free speech in the sense of like trying to have rational discourse. It's a sense of it's meant to hurt. It's meant to intimidate, and it would be shocking. I think we were the first to see it because we peeled it off. It would be shocking to any Holocaust survivor or close descendant to see a swastika, and it's supposed to hurt, and so I do think, in the German case, they say that kind of language is not real discourse. That's like that it's not even like intellectually, like it's a very nefarious kind of discourse that's meant to undermine free speech. It's not, they're not playing the game in good faith. They're trying to break the game, so to speak.
I don't agree with that.
You don't agree with that? Okay.
Well, here's what I don't agree with. I mean, it may be true what the intention was. In fact, I'm sure it was true what the intention was. But that to me is not a sufficient standard. Because you can't say, we're going to ban stuff that's designed to intimidate me or Jews or people I like. We would have to erect a standard that you're not allowed to say anything that hurts people's feelings or that makes people feel unsafe, which is exactly what's happening on campus now. That's always the argument. That's always the language. I feel unsafe. The expression of this opinion, affirmative action is a bad idea. I feel unsafe. I feel attacked. Once you start down that road, there's almost nothing that you can't ban. And let me say about Germany, I mean, of course, there are understandable reasons why the expression of Nazi sympathies is outlawed there. Hasn't stopped the far right from coming back. Freddie DeBoer just wrote a column about that like yesterday. They're just going to pop. You ban one symbol, they invent another symbol. You ban one party, they just rename it something else. So it doesn't work. And I also think it's wrong. Someone told me a story that I took a very different message from than the one he intended. He was talking about some professor somewhere, some engineering, I think an engineering professor, some kind of STEM professor who's a Holocaust denier. And he had tenure when he started to come out with this, so they couldn't fire him. So they just haven't been giving him a raise. And he's like, this is like 40 years ago, and he makes like, $28,000 a year. I thought that was terrible. I thought that was inexcusable. You have no right not to give him a raise because he's a Holocaust denier. It's none of your goddamn business. You don't like what he believes? Too bad. Is he a good teacher? He's a scientist. Is he a productive scholar? Nothing to do with his Holocaust denial? Then he gets treated like everybody else. Okay? Yes, I'm worked up about this because I think it's wrong, but also because once you start to do that, you can do it to anybody. Okay? And the left is in power now in the academy, in the institutions, in the culture. They've forgotten that as recently as the 50s, or even really the 80s, the right was in power. So once you break this barrier, and once you establish the idea that it's okay to suppress people because their speech is offensive or offensive to the community, 20 years from now, it's going to be you. It's going to be you.
Well, again, in the extreme case, I think it would be us. Whether or not you allow Nazi symbology when they're in power, there's no way they're going to allow any. You know what I'm saying? So not everyone plays fair.
But letting
we can play fair, but not
letting Nazis have marches is not the same. This is always the argument. We shouldn't tolerate intolerance. What happens when they get into power? The answer is to not let them take power. And you don't let them take power by, doing the political work that everybody always has to do.
Right.
And we see what the suppression of right-wing opinion has led in this country. It's led to an explosion of right-wing opinion. It's not working. The only way to do this is by the rules, by the book. you know,
in the last few minutes, can you just end with sharing how your most recent essay, Birthrights, where you talk about the way in which you think about some of these questions of identity
yeah.
is informed by your Jewish identity.
It's
And that's certainly true for me too. What?
It's the most recent piece in the book.
Right.
I've
Sorry.
written
Yes.
since then. Yeah.
Um,
Sorry. Did I let you finish your question?
Yeah, more or less, but I'll just try again. That basically that just yeah, repeating myself what I said before, that how the way you think about identity in our modern era, in the sense that identity being a politically charged issue, how that's been informed by your experience and the way you think about your Jewish identity.
Right. So really what that piece, Birthrights, is about, it's about the experience of living in an identity group and how it can make you see the world, how identity groups see the world, right? And I wrote it because I started to see more and more analogies between a lot of the things that I was hearing, proponents of Black Lives Matter or critical race theory or the self-appointed spokespeople for the Black community in general were saying, and also self-appointed spokespeople for the trans community and for all women, feminist community. And again, I'm a progressive, okay? I believe in equal rights for all of those groups. And I recognize that there are, if not systemic, then certainly systematic ways and certainly historical ways that they have been or are being oppressed. The question is, what do you do with that? Okay? And more I saw analogies between what I was hearing from those groups, often at places like NPR or The Times, hearing from journalists, hearing from academics, and what I experienced first as growing up modern Orthodox, and then when I left modern Orthodoxy when I was 15, in progressive Zionism, right? In my Zionist youth movement, which sort of took me through my early 20s. It was less pronounced in the Zionist youth movement than in Orthodoxy. But basically, the way I grew up, I'm not going to say all Orthodox Jews are like this. You learn to see the world as us versus them. They all hate us. We have to stick together. There's one right way to be a Jew. And this is a situation that it's almost beyond that it's existed throughout history. It's almost transhistorical. It's almost metaphysical. And in Judaism, at a certain point, it does become metaphysical. And, Amalek, the tribe that attacked the Jewish people in the wilderness, sort of becomes this metaphysical symbol of everything that's evil in the world, or everything that's pointed at the Jews. In the same way that we've gone from talking about race relations and black and white to talking about blackness and especially whiteness, as if whiteness were this metaphysical principle. So that's what I talk about in this. I tell the story of my Orthodox childhood and my Zionist youth, and then I pivot and I say, everything I've just been talking about, we see now. Oh, one more thing that I forgot to add, that's maybe the most important. It's not just that there's this thick line down the middle of the world where we're on one side and the bad people are on the other, the goyim or it's that we're the center of the world. Mm-hmm. Everything is about us. Everything is about the Jews. Everything that happens, you open the newspaper and one way or another, every story leads back to us somehow. Like literally, I had a teacher, a rabbi in 10th grade in Yeshiva High School, who performed this exercise for us one day with the New York Times. And that's often what I hear when people talk about their identity group. I mean, in a sense, it's sort of like it's the thesis of the 1619 Project, which is that the essential fact about every American institution and every important event in American history is slavery and racism, as if there were no other important factors in American history, or certainly none of equal importance. To me, this is preposterous. It's a form of group narcissism.
So the analogy that comes to mind for me when I think about, again, the insular Orthodox world, which I certainly have a foot in, even to today, is that it reminds me of like the Black Power movement, or like Malcolm X. There's a famous example when like a white college student, said, "I'm very sympathetic to your cause. What can I do for you?" And Malcolm X responded, I don't want your help. Black people, should be separate from white people. And, I think a lot of, in the Orthodox Jewish world thinks that way. So do you see this like modern progressive wokeness as being an extension of that kind of real separatism? And do you think of it in terms of that?
No, it's not. No, it's in that respect, it's different. It's not about separatism. Mm-hmm. But it is, I mean, if you read Ibram Kendi, it's about completely reorienting society. Yeah, whatever. I mean, we could go into this.
We could stop here. Yeah, you get the last word, and
I've
I'm
said
done.
what I
I'm nothing else to
say about
say.
this for now.
What?
I've said what I've had to say
Yeah.
about this for now. I mean, I think it's a little too late in the conversation to start
It
digging
is.
into,
We're it's the last few
the
minutes,
problems
and
of it. Yeah.
we have a lot. We had a lot to talk about already. Um, Look, I mean, this was wonderful. I think the book was a delight. It was engaging on every level. And I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I honestly wish we had 3 hours, but it's a very narcissistic, obnoxious thing to say to a just busy person like you.
It's okay. But I enjoyed the
'Cause
conversation too. I really did.
there's no limit, I think, to I think almost every essay we could have sunk our teeth into. But really, I really appreciated the time that you gave me. It was really incredibly generous. And thank you so much. And I look forward to following you and following your writing going forward.
Thank you very much.